Afternoon, colleagues. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 24 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, and the motion adopted on Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, the committee shall resume consideration of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on November 4th, 2025. I would like to welcome our Minister of Canadian Identity, Mark Miller, who is joined with his Deputy Minister, Francis Bilodeau, with the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Joël Montminy, Assistant Deputy Minister, Blair McMurrin, and the Chief Financial Officer, Véronique Côté. With that, Minister, you have 5 minutes of opening remarks. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Nice to see all of you. I do want to begin by acknowledging the land we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Thank you for inviting me here today. In this time, as you all know, marked by uncertainty, changing economy, unprecedented challenges as a society, we know that more than ever, we need to protect our identity and stand together to confront these challenges. In his mandate letter, the Prime Minister set out our government's priorities for meeting this moment, defending our sovereignty, strengthening our country on the world stage, and creating a Canada that our children and grandchildren deserve. Dans le budget 2025, notre gouvernement
Budget 2025 confirms the government's commitment to protecting what makes Canada unique and brings Canadians together through continued investments in our official languages, our public institutions, and our natural and cultural heritage. I have the privilege of talking to you today about Bill C-15, which has many measures to support journalism and culture and our national identity.
However, we are proposing only one corrective measure directly through BIA, which is the reason for my appearance today. In 2023, Bills C-11, the Online Streaming Act, and C-13, the Modernization of the Official Languages Act, were considered around the same time and both sought to amend the same section of the Broadcasting Act. While in the Senate, Bill C-11 had a privacy provision added, which was later unintentionally overwritten when Bill C-13 was passed. The measure that we're proposing in the BIA simply corrects this error and restores Parliament's original intent. I don't assume that'll take up 50 minutes of discussion, but wanted to highlight it. Pour revenir au budget 2025, nous fournissons.
To come back to the 2025 budget, we are providing funding to have more impact in sports, industries, culture, arts, and of course, community celebrations. Canadian creators strengthen our economy by creating jobs and by stimulating innovation, which counts for the long term, and stimulating Canada's productivity on the world stage. The 2025 budget brings over $500,000 to grow the Canadian audiovisual sector, which is non-negligible. We aim to better support creators of Canadian content. And there's also a supplementary funding for the ONF, for the NFB.
$150 million for CBC Radio-Canada and over $46 million to support performing arts. The special measures for journalism component of the Canadian Periodical Fund will also be extended to support community news outlets and magazine publishers. Funding for the Sports Support Program will build on previous investments to advance diversity and gender equality in the Canadian sports system. Other items include funding for arts and heritage activities, increased support to help with hosting of FIFA Men's World Cup in 2026, as well as efforts to support the awareness of Indigenous cultures. Nous avons également annoncé un investissement de plus de 1,4 milliard de dollars dans l'enseignement.
We've also announced more than $1.4 billion towards minority language communities and learning of a second language. And we will be very closely collaborating with all territorial and provincial governments. Our official languages are not only a treasure for each and every one of us, they also open doors to international trade and cooperation between provinces and territories.
Pride by investing in the traditions that bring communities together. It provides $21 million for local festivals and events, as well as $20 million to support Canada Day celebrations across the country. Nous doublons également le financement annuel des
We're
célébrations.
also doubling our annual Acadian National Holiday funding. And since the Canada Strong Pass was such a success last year, we will be renewing that initiative.
26 to help families save as they discover and rediscover the incredible cultural and natural treasures that make our country so great. Our culture is vibrant, unique, and diverse, and it's the tie that binds us. It puts our shared values and national identity on display and serves as our calling card to the world. It reflects our strength, our confidence, and our inclusiveness, and it's what makes us and Canada truly exceptional. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to answering your questions. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister Miller. We will begin with 6 minutes from Ms. Thomas. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Bill C-11, of course, as mentioned in your opening remarks, it was sold as not regulating user content. However, the CRTC has recently confirmed that it can, in fact, require algorithms to manipulate what Canadians see online, which ultimately would boil down to censorship if that were the case. It's exactly what Conservatives have warned about. It's exactly what Canadians have been very much concerned by. And so I'm just curious as to what you make of this then, now that the CRTC is willing to admit that they can, in fact, compel algorithms.
Well, this is first and foremost, Ms. Thomas, an issue when it comes to the ongoing work that the CRTC is doing in making sure that we are properly regulating platforms and specifically what the CRTC is currently seized with, which is making sure that people are providing Canadian content. This isn't about free speech. It isn't about telling people what to do. It's about making sure that we have a thriving broadcasting and a modern broadcasting system in a country like Canada, geographically situated, and making sure that we survive in a country that gets a lot from American culture.
So algorithms can, in fact, then result in speech censorship. What do you make of that? If algorithms are compelled, it means that people will be able to see certain content and not other content. That means certain content can be put into, some abyss somewhere where folks cannot access it, or they can post it, but then it'll automatically be hidden because of an algorithm. That's censorship. It's keeping some people from being able to say what they would like to say online, and it's keeping others from being able to see what they would like to be able to see or listen to online.
I think you and I think indeed this committee have seen what algorithms can do, and if they are manipulated, how the effect of that manipulation can have on the availability of content. I don't think there's any suggestion that the CRTC is going to suppress algorithms or suppress speech by making sure people are behaving responsibly. Are you suggesting otherwise?
By the CRTC's own omission, they are saying that they do have the ability...
you said omission or admission.
By their own admission, sorry, thank you. They are saying that they have the ability to compel certain algorithms
Well, the CRTC is a regulatory agency. It has to live up to the standards of their own constituent
And in order to
charters.
achieve the outcomes of Bill C-11, it would then be incumbent upon the CRTC to compel certain algorithms to be enacted.
I think you're reading a lot more into that than what the CRTC is actually doing, which is
Are you able then to
responsible
assure Canadians here
regulator.
today that that will not in fact be the case, that algorithms will not be compelled, that outcomes will not be instituted?
Are you suggesting that any platform can use any algorithm to push its own narrative and content into the Canadian public?
Minister,
and that should be
I'm
unregulated?
just asking for assurance for the Canadian
Well,
people.
I'm asking
if you can in fact assure them that algorithms will not be mandated in such a way that it would control certain things from appearing online and others mandated to appear online.
What I can assure Canadians is that the CRTC can and is expected to do its job, which is to make sure we have a properly regulated
Which
broadcast
they are saying
environment.
that they have the ability to compel algorithms. So, Minister, what you are effectively saying then is that you stand behind that.
I think we agree to disagree on that.
With all due respect, I think that is exactly what you just admitted to. Minister, Bill C-11 came into effect in June of 2024. It's been almost 2 years. What tangible accomplishment has been achieved through Bill C-11 for the Canadian people? It was touted as something that would further our identity and our culture. I'm just curious as to what tangible things it's done to do that.
I think by its passage, it has signaled to the industry, it's signaled to Canadians that we are expecting people to behave in a way, in a free and open society, as they should, and to build up and to make sure we are building a society that allows, in this environment, the media to thrive, justly, as you highlighted, supporting freedom of expression, but in an environment that is fair and accessible to all.
And you would say that that outcome has been achieved?
I don't think we're entirely there, no.
What part of that outcome has been achieved?
I think we passed a law that was very important to make sure that people are doing their jobs and in some cases, paying their fair share.
Okay, but in fact, Bill C-11 is caught up in the courts.
Yes.
And
People
actually
are allowed to sue in Canada.
absolutely, and actually really hasn't gone forward in any way. But there's been a whole lot of money spent by the CRTC on Bill C-11 and building a regulatory framework. And so, is that really the best use of Canadian dollars when nothing has been accomplished for nearly 2 years?
Well, I certainly wouldn't reduce funds to the justice system simply because people are suing, which is their right. I think
I'm not asking for money to be reduced to the justice system, Minister. Don't put words in my mouth, please.
no, I didn't. Didn't hear a question from you.
So right now, Canadians are struggling more than ever with affordability. And the changes that were brought in with Bill C-11 and with Bill C-18, the Online News Act, it has increased the cost of subscriptions.
Thank you, Ms.
It
Thomas.
will
That
likely
concludes
further
the time
increase the
for
cost
this
going down the
round.
road.
We're going
What
to
do you make of
continue
that?
now. Ms. Thomas, that concludes your time. Thank you. Mr. Letao, on va continuer avec vous pour 6 minutes. Merci.
Mr. Letao, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. So good day, Minister, and good day to your colleagues from the department accompanying you today. Let's come back to the budget, and especially to the investments that have been planned in this budget. Investments which will make it possible to directly support the cultural sector in Quebec. I'll have 2 questions on this topic. Briefly, could you please give us the highlights of the investments into the Quebec cultural sector?
Mais d'abord, grosso modo, comme je l'ai souligné dans
First of all, as I said in my introductory remarks, about $700 million will be invested into arts and culture. That's $26 million for the National Film Board, $150 million for Telefilm, and $150 million for CBC Radio-Canada, and $58 million for the Canada Media Fund, and $127 million for the Canada Media Fund, which is also important for Quebec, and $58 million for the Music Fund. And this will have impacts for Canadian and Quebec culture, which is extremely important for a sector that is the pride of Quebec and of Canada. Thank you very much, Minister. And since you mentioned CBC Radio-Canada, this seems to be a point of great interest for our friends on the other side. So could you please give your view as to why it is important for the Canadian state to support CBC Radio-Canada? Well, it is the 4th pillar of our democracy, media, a well-funded public broadcaster. It is therefore an important building block into that pillar. And those who carry out research in this sector know that it is not a surprise that when we compare CBC to its peers in other G7 nations, it is underfunded and these entities require good funding so that Canadians can have access to trustworthy news. And also, the entity needs to be independent. That is essential to its credibility. And given the current environment, where there's so much cynicism, if we were to subtract funding, I think that this would further erode public trust and the credibility of this public broadcaster, which again is essential. It's important not only for democracy, but also to have trustworthy news. Mr. Minister, I can personally say that I have always found that CBC Radio-Canada has always done great work. It is a very high-quality news media source. And so, yes, it is very useful and very much necessary for us to continue to invest in that entity. On another topic, something that's very important in my opinion, is that in Quebec we have a number of festivals, events, and cultural gatherings that are very important to the vitality of our economic and cultural identity in Quebec. And of course, we need to support those sectors. So could you please tell us a little about support for this type of initiative and why all of this is such an asset for Quebec culture? That's an extremely relevant question. I did refer to that in my speech. It's not a surprise to anyone in North America. Quebec is the only Francophone nation in the whole of North America, and in order to preserve that culture, it does require support from the federal government, whether it be through investments in arts, culture, or the public broadcaster. I think people know very well that there are multiple levels of government that invest into this, but the federal government has to ensure that this culture is maintained not only in Quebec but across Canada. Madam Chair, how much time? 5 minutes left. Thank you. 5 seconds. What I find very interesting is, as I said earlier, in many cases, these festivals and events, we always see them happening in Quebec City and Montreal and so forth. But when it comes to small communities in the rural regions, a small cultural event supported by the federal government can really have a huge impact, because it might be the only activity available in that region. Thank you very much, Mr. Letao. I'm sorry, Minister, there's no time for the answer. We will continue with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes. Thank you. If Mr. Letao has 45 minutes left, he should share that around to the rest of us. So, Mr. Minister, you said earlier, the media are the fourth pillar of our democracy. When it comes to private TV, private media, and local media, are those all part of it, or is it just Radio-Canada that is the fourth pillar of our democracy? No. Actually, I think you already knew the answer to the question, and very clearly the answer is no. I think the question that you're going to ask me is, what is the role of the state to support it? So $150 million for CBC Radio-Canada for this year. You know that as Quebecers, we're not against that. But television is going through a crisis. What do you have laid out in the budget for that, for the other entities that make up that fourth pillar? Well, I asked myself the question, what is the role of the state in supporting these organizations? We support them through numerous tax credits, but what is new in the budget? What are the new measures? Well, you saw what I already laid out, And I know that you might hold it against me that there was nothing for it. No, I won't hold it against you. So the support that was there for the media was support for CBC Radio-Canada. And was that a number that CBC asked the government, or did the government come up with it? I'm not aware of that. You're not aware? So the Minister of Heritage doesn't know. I wasn't the Minister of Heritage at that time of the election, as you know. Okay, excellent. So we see that there's not much earmarked for those other entities. We want to reiterate that all of the media ecosystem is important and makes up that fourth pillar. And yes, they have tax credits. So the goal really is to support communities through these proposals that we made. That's why we made the proposals that we did. And we think that funding is deserved by the other entities that make up that fourth pillar. I would also like to talk to you about living arts. There's a lot of money for culture. Your predecessor said it, and we applauded that. But the Canada Arts Council asked for $140 million, which was supported by the entire industry. So it's a $6 million budget that was given to them. They asked for 140 and you gave them $6 million. You don't know what CBC even asked for, and you gave them 150 million. So can you tell us how that is decided? It's not binary the way that you described it. And secondly, when it comes to the budget, especially when it comes to an election period, there is a decision-making process and priorities that are defined. And that led you to, because I would say that the Canada Arts Council is very important to properly fund. So you say there's a process that led to 150 million being asked for. Well, we did give several $1 million to the Arts Council. That's not nothing. So you gave 150 million to CBC. How do you get from a requested amount of 140 million to what they got? And we know that you gave $150 million to CBC in the middle of an election period. So tell me more about this process that leads to that calculation. It wasn't a surprise that CBC needed funding. We carried out an in-depth analysis to try and see what was requested. CBC is independent. I would like to talk to you about Ticketmaster Live Nation. This is under your file. I think it's an important one. So in 2010, those two companies came together, and the U.S. Congress currently is looking into an antitrust case against this conglomerate. Since 2019, it's like a cartel that controls about 40% of the market shares, 50% even. I'd like to know what you think of that issue, and if you, together with the industry department, have contacted the Competition Bureau to see what would happen here in Canada. I won't be able to speak on behalf of the industry department, but no, I did not contact the competition office. I do find it concerning. Any type of monopoly in the country worries me. When we talk about Eventco and Live Nation, Eventco, which produces a number of festivals, we have to ask ourselves about the way they behave, of course. I don't think anyone is going to. The interpreter notes that both speakers are speaking at once. I'm not going to debate you on that. Do I have 20 seconds left, Madam Chair? I'm not telling you that you haven't done anything. I'm just telling you that this is a file that's concerning to me, given the file that I'm responsible for, and I was curious to know if it had become a bigger issue than just for the industry department. And since you're new in your role, I thought it would be worthwhile to ask you the question. And if there are any developments, I think it would be very worthwhile to share that with the committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Garon. There's no time for an answer, Minister, but we will continue.
5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. You are the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture. Do you believe that religion is an integral part of Canadian culture and identity?
Absolutely.
So you obviously know where this is going. On October 30th, when you were the chair of the Justice Committee, you spoke about how there is, quote, clear hatred in some verses of the Bible and Torah, and that prosecutors should be able to have the discretion to lay charges if someone invokes a particular scripture that you find objectionable. So how are you standing up for the various diverse communities, faith communities in particular, that you extolled in your opening statement, when you believe that sincerely held religious beliefs should attract prosecution?
I believe anyone should be able to freely read the Bible, Torah, Quran, or any religious scripture. It's a guarantee in the Charter that I will defend as well as you will.
Unless it's a verse that
Mr.
you
Long.
don't like.
What I said, and you were there. No, I'm glad to answer that. Ken.
Mr. McDonald?
This has nothing to do with the budget or the BIA Act. He's line of question.
Thank you.
It
Yeah.
stems from comments made in his opening statement, Madam Chair.
Excuse me. Yeah, I didn't recognize you, Mr. Lawton. Mr. McDonald, it's not a point of order. Thank you very much, Mr. Lawton. You can continue to have the floor, but I would ask that you be recognized before you take it. Thank you.
I think that I don't think religious scripture should be used as a defense for a hate crime. If someone publicly says that they want to kill all the gays and that they are relying on a passage in Leviticus, they should be prosecuted. Hard stop. And I'm a Christian. I believe firmly that person should be prosecuted.
And that would not be a good faith usage of Scripture.
That's your debate, but sometimes prosecutors may be prevented from laying charges because there's some hesitation. I think it needs to be clear in the law, and I think you would agree with it, and any reasonable person would as well.
You mentioned back in December, I think if you talk to people of faith and even religious leaders, they would see that this is really something that makes sense regarding removing those religious speech protections from the criminal code. I have spoken to people of faith and religious leaders, and Bill C-9 and the removal of the religious defense has been denounced by the Primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, the United Church of Canada, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the Rabbinical Council of Toronto, the Conference of Canadian Catholic Bishops, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. Why do you believe that you know more than these faith groups about religious freedom and protections for religion in Canada?
As a Protestant, I rely on my relationship with Jesus and my reading of the Bible. I believe ministers can be guides. So I think I stand on an equal footing. I think you would agree with me with that. But if you really want to protect religious institutions, you will talk to Pierre Poilievre, Parliament's only temporary foreign worker, and have him pass C-9 to protect religious institutions.
Your government has signaled that the Online Harms Act, which has been twice tabled and twice not passed, will be returning. This is a bill that, among other things, would, in its previous incarnations, reinstitute Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which allows for the Human Rights Code to go after what the government deems online hate speech. Will that be a part of the forthcoming Online Harms Act?
Look, if you want my opinion on it.
Well, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for your insight as the minister.
Well, I'm not going to speak about deliberations that are in front of Cabinet. If you want my opinion, there are issues in and around freedom of expression about any act that would be presented into Parliament to keep Canadians and particularly children safe from online harms. And I don't think it's necessary to have a private recourse regime under the Canadian Human Rights Act.
We have a bill that's before this House of Commons already from Michelle Rempel-Garner, I believe C-216. I might be wrong about the number, but it creates a duty of care for tech companies to deal with very legitimate online harms against children, against sexual victims. Why not support that?
I'm not unsupportive of it, frankly. I spoke to your colleague, Ms. Thomas, recently about that. I haven't yet, in fairness, to speak to Ms. Rempel about it. I think the motive behind it and the purpose behind it is laudable. I think in the articulation of it, it properly should be introduced by the government and supported by one, but willing to work with her on the details.
Will the forthcoming Online Harms Act be a bill that you put forward, or will it be a justice bill?
It's TBD.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. We will now continue with Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, other witnesses. Minister Miller Prince Edward Island's cultural identity is deeply rooted in its Acadian heritage, and it's reflected in many of the family names around my living area, names like Arsenault and Gallant and Paquette and Chasson. And it represents generations of language, arts, and culture throughout Prince Edward Island and indeed Atlantic Canada. This heritage is celebrated every year through National Acadian Day, and in this budget we did commit funds to continue funding that celebration. Can you just elaborate on what investments the federal government has made in budget 2025 so that Acadian and Francophone families and communities across Prince Edward Island and Atlantic Canada can continue to see these tangible benefits?
Okay, it's a really important question, Ken. I perhaps didn't have as much time in answering Mr. Latau's question, but there are events across Canada that really merit and deserve support from the Canadian government, and often sometimes we're there with the provinces, and sometimes we are not. This budget round, we had $4 million going into the Fête Nationale des Acadiens et des Acadiennes. It's so important. I have Acadian blood in my own veins, so I'm proud to support that as well. But it's so important for the Acadian nation to make sure that we are supporting them with the appropriate funds to celebrate their day. If anyone hasn't seen the Tintamarre, I would encourage them to go do it. It's not every Acadian town that does that, but it's neat to go see. And it's, again, part of, it's a painful part of our history, but it's a shared history, and it's one that we have to continue to support. So those millions of dollars will go to some really cool events in the middle of the summer.
Thank you, Minister. Also in PEI, we have the Confederation Center of the Arts, which was opened in 1964. And it's a historic performing arts facility that gives many visitors an opportunity to see island culture. I think over 200,000 people a year visit there. 150,000 are attending performances, exhibits, and educational programs just last year. So, Minister, we see a transformation taking place there at the Confederation Center of the Arts. There's a construction of a new rehearsal hall. So with these cultural buildings like these that inspire Canadians, what's in budget 2025 to continue the operation of these facilities and promote culture and events in Atlantic Canada?
Anytime we're promoting the birthplace of Confederation, we're doing a good thing. As you mentioned, and you were modest enough not to mention the amounts, but I'm not that modest, but I think putting over $5 million into renovations that not only draw Canadians, and with more and more Canadians traveling within Canada, certainly we'll see more Canadians, but really international travel for Charlottetown to shine and show on the Canadian and the world stage our beautiful shared history. So it's something that I don't think anyone should vote against, because it is so critical to highlighting who we are as a country and our history, and again, the birthplace of Confederation.
Thank you, Minister. And then further along, we talk in the budget about the $150 million for CBC Radio Canada, on top of the $42 million that was already topped up. In our region, we depend a lot in smaller communities for that public funding for CBC, because it may be the only shop in town that's delivering news, real news in my opinion, and playing local music, local talent. Can you speak further on the importance of providing that funding for those smaller communities that depend on it?
Yeah, and I have these discussions in the context of even modernizing CBC and RADCAN's mandate. What we often hear from regions is, yes, that heat map of where CBC RADCAN penetrates is not perfect, but in some communities that is perhaps the only resource to get news. Let's not get into whether to other unreliable news that are penetrating, but it is important, and I think it is to the colleagues that we're talking about, the fourth pillar of our democracy, so critical, more than just news, making sure that people are being able to hear themselves in their accents and languages, that they see when they talk to their family or
Thank
go to
you,
the store.
Minister.
But
Thank
also
you, Mr.
getting
McDonald.
getting
We're gonna
fair
have
news in
end it
remote
there.
areas.
We'll continue with Monsieur Garand pour 2 minutes et demie. Merci.
Mr. Garon for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, Bill C-15 includes a provision, and you probably know that libraries and municipalities in Quebec are in particular concerned about this because they wouldn't be able to. Rather, there's an exception for libraries. The Quebec Library Network has been looking into this, and they do have a preferential rate. And this allows them to be able to move books around in the regions. We have an association of people with visual disabilities. And this exception is very important for them. The Minister of Finance was not aware of it when I spoke with him. Are you concerned by this at all, and would you be open to us working together on amendments to make sure that this preferential rate for libraries can be maintained? Well, I admit you're taking me by surprise, but I can see the issue that you're talking about. So let's come back to television. Mr. McDonald almost just told us that, well, for the first year in science and economics, we're teachers, and we teach them that information is something that is news is expensive to produce. And when it comes to social media, they can publish just as much as television can. And private television is important. And we believe that it's the role of the state to fund those. So what would you say is the state's role in funding private television? In your opinion? We could talk about this all day long. I would hope not. Well, for one, briefly, please. There is a role for the CRTC that is played out, and we know that in the current context, those organizations do need support. I'm sorry, Minister. We'll come back to you next time. We're now going to continue with Mr. Lefebvre for 5 minutes. I'm going to share my time with my colleagues who will take the floor. Please.
Minister, what do you believe fundamentally the role of CBC is?
I think, and even if you were to consider one of the great philosophers of the conservative movement, in Burke, that it, as I mentioned earlier, is a fourth pillar of democracy. So keeping me, you accountable to the public by making sure there is reliable information that people can have and consume as they get their information about whatever they want, but most importantly, judge and elect people like me and you to this place.
Does a television show about a tomato that speaks to children about colonialism fit that?
I don't know. What do you think?
I would say that's not something that government needs to subsidize. There have also been, just to use a recent example, a CBC News story called "I Felt People Would Judge Me for Getting Botox, Then I Realized I Was Judging Myself." I haven't read that. It may or may not be interesting, but is this vital to the Canadian identity and cultural fabric that we must pay for this?
Well, I think you expect your public broadcaster to have shows that are relevant to the public. It doesn't have to be necessarily relevant to you or me. And as an important aspect of that, I shouldn't be telling them what to do. I can have my view on it, but again, I shouldn't be telling them what to do.
If CBC were not there, is the belief that there would be no one else to broadcast the Olympics? Something that countries around the world or broadcasters around the world spend huge amounts of money for the rights to do. Why is a state broadcaster needed to galvanize what could be a moneymaker for private media companies?
You could probably debate about it, but I just think it makes sense. There could be. But also the CBC does a pretty good job of it. And why wouldn't it do?
Do you believe CBC's role should be to fill gaps that otherwise no one else would fill, or is it to, do something, even if it means competing with private players in the market?
I think definitely it's a lot of the former and perhaps some of the latter. We talked with my colleague Ken McDonald about getting into remote regions. I think CBC has a duty to get that information into more remote regions where it isn't economically viable to do so. So absolutely. Maintaining the vitality of our official languages, especially in Francophone communities outside Quebec, is key, given the state of the language in those communities.
I don't know if the Tomato spoke about colonialism in both official languages or not.
Maybe not, but I'm sure it did a great job of it.
Okay. I yield to Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Minister, on those lines, your government has committed another $150 million to the CBC. There was already $1.4 billion that was committed. This is at a time when Canadians are struggling with affordability. They are the taxpayer. They are the ones that are ultimately paying for that increase that is going to the CBC. Meanwhile, the CBC viewership is down, trust is down. Canadians just aren't there with you, Minister, and yet they're expected to foot the bill. So I'm curious on their behalf, what accountability measures are being used to determine that this is in fact a wise use of dollars?
Well, I think when you look at the numbers, and the numbers are revealing, Ms. Thomas, the CBC per capita is not as well funded as any comparator country. Only under us are the US, and we're pretty close to one other country. So there's general consensus that a robust publicly funded national broadcaster is important to democracies like ours. Do they get everything right? I think certainly the answer is no, but it is important for them to be there to do exactly what they are supposed to do, which is to inform the public, for example, on issues of affordability. So you perhaps, and your party has been quite open about defunding the CBC, but I think that would undermine the trust of Canadians that are relying on information from reliable providers to make those decisions as to who to vote for. And they have been remarkably good at getting that information out, in my view.
If I may, the question was around accountability, but rather than offering any metrics that you as a government are using to determine the success of the CBC and whether or not more money should be spent there, the only thing you've mentioned is comparing to other countries and what they're spending. So you're more interested in keeping up with others, the Joneses, if you will, than you are with holding the broadcaster accountable for actually producing what Canadians rely on. Viewership is down, trust is down. Canadians are not buying into this. But you're insisting that we need to spend more money because other countries are doing it. Why is that your metric? Why are you not holding the CBC
Thank you,
to
Ms.
greater
Thomas.
account?
That concludes the time for this round. We'll continue with Mr. Sawatsky for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Minister, and to everyone for coming today. And it was so great to see you in British Columbia. The Minister, the Fraser Mills sawmill was built on the banks of the Fraser River, and it recruited 100 French Canadians as workers for the area. So these families were founded, the workers themselves founded the French-speaking village of Mayaldeville, which is a part of my riding, and that became one of the largest French-speaking communities west of the Rockies in the 20th century. So today, Mayaldeville is an important historic site for the Franco-Colombian community, and there's also some local organizations such as the Société Francophone de Mayaldeville that are doing important work to preserve the French language there. Now, of course, being the minister responsible for official languages, the protection and support of the French language is one of your responsibilities. So could you explain what's included in Budget 2025 to ensure that we're supporting Canadian French language and content both at home and abroad?
And as I mentioned to your colleague, Mr. Letao, there are, the supports that we've talked about at some length now for CBC, Radio-Canada, for Telefilm, for the Office National du Film. Those are really important budgetary measures in the context of a budget that had a rationalization aspect to it. As we looked at making some difficult choices as to what we were prioritizing, I think prioritizing institutions that make us and continue to make us proud of our Canadian national identity, including the promotion of our official languages across Canada, is key, and including into penetrating into small communities like the one you mentioned. I know you have made significant efforts to learn French yourself. I think that is laudable. There need to be more opportunities in that respect. We have been signing bilateral agreements with provinces, over $1 billion for education agreements for second language learning. More often than not, that is French, as well as the action plan that saw significant investments into the French language across Canada, including in Quebec.
Thank you very much, Minister. On a separate note, I saw an article where you mentioned the show Heated Rivalry as a Canadian content triumph. It just happens to be the case that Hudson Williams also worked in my riding of New Westminster, Burnaby, Mayotville at the old spaghetti factory, which was just behind my old constituency office. So I know that federal funding has helped this show. Would you like to explain or provide some examples about how federal funding has enabled Canadian stories to reach new audiences at home and abroad?
Yeah, look, this has been, I don't think that's an exception. Hopefully it would be a rule, seeing what Heated Rivalry is doing. It would not exist if the federal government had not invested about $4 million into the programming. That's a quarter of the funding, and you fold in some of the tax credits. That show was pitched to American producers. They passed for a variety of reasons, even though they liked it, because people were not willing to trust instinct and embrace the risk. And with the funds that were provided by the Canadian government, that show now is breaking all sorts of records and defying stereotypes in society, and even in countries where views on the gay community and the LGBT rights are not what they are here in Canada. So it's a great show and all that, but there's also spurring a lot of discussions, especially for young kids in locker rooms in a toxic environment, questioning who they are, and if they feel inspired by that, that's cool too.
Absolutely. It was a funny moment to see the Prime Minister say, "Do the leg thing." That was quite a moment. Giving Canadian children the opportunity to explore this beautiful country is definitely an important role for the government. So what actions is the government taking to safeguard Canadian identity while promoting our culture through initiatives like the Canada Strong Pass?
Yeah, that's a really cool pass, and perhaps people would say, well, why are we supporting museums in that way, and shouldn't we be doing something else? But museums are a great place for kids to discover in a healthy way a whole ton of things, whether it's dinosaurs in Toronto or airplanes at right here. There's cool things to discover, and in this, I think if the numbers are right, 500,000 kids saw or were visited museums and benefited from the Canada Strong Pass that we are going to extend in 2026. Over the Christmas period, we saw an uptick. We don't have the numbers of that, but clearly we're seeing more kids going there.
We're going to have to conclude
it's not just limited to kids; it's for all Canadians.
I have to say, a Canadian show must have broken the cultural sound barrier when Heated Rivalry gets brought up in Parliament at the Finance Committee. And so on that, Ms. Kobina, we're going to turn to you for 5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you for joining us, Minister. I think this is the first time I actually get to ask some questions. My first question to you, though, is why do you need the power to exempt any person or corporation from almost any federal law except for the criminal code to do your job?
I don't necessarily. It's probably a useful tool to have. I think those clauses that do find their way into legislation are often interpreted with a standard of reasonableness, but to be quite clear, we don't necessarily need them, but they're a useful tool to have.
Okay, so you don't need it. Would you be open to removing it then from this bill?
From C-15?
Yep.
No.
Why not?
Well, it's not my job to remove it, but it's a useful tool to have in the context, particularly if we're trying to get things done in a rapid fashion.
Well, the concern is that you are able to make decisions on your own, based on your prerogative, behind closed doors with no accountability to Parliament or to Canadians. And so in your remarks, you talked about protecting what makes Canada unique, being a democracy, that this clause is undemocratic. So why would you like to keep it?
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Why would you like to keep the clause if it is undemocratic? You can exempt any company or entity or person, individual, from almost any federal law except for the criminal code on your own, with no public disclosure behind closed doors?
Well, like I said, it's not an indispensable tool. It's a helpful tool to have. These clauses are often interpreted by courts on a standard of reasonableness in the context. And in the context that we are seeing with things moving very rapidly, I think it is important for us to be able to have some nimbleness.
But if there is no accountability to the public and you are not actually, you don't have to disclose what conflict of interest act was violated or anything like that, then I don't think that's in the best interest of the country.
Well, first, this is a bill on which members will be asked to vote. It is also one where my belief is to be able to use that tool is one that should be used sparingly, but again, useful to have in the context.
But why should one minister, individual minister, be allowed to bypass 150 years of Canadian law and exempt a person or company of their choosing?
Yeah, look, that may be your view, but I don't think that is what's happening.
Well, that's how it's written.
It doesn't say people are being exempted from 150 years of law.
It says from any federal law except the criminal code.
Right. There's no mention of years or.
It's any federal law except
Sure.
for the criminal. So it's any federal law that has been passed over the last 150 years.
Right. I'm not going to parse this out with you.
So just to be clear, you don't need it to do your job, but you want to keep it nonetheless.
I think it's helpful to have.
Do you see the potential of abuse, though, in that companies or people will have to lobby you personally and not care about the law itself?
No one's asked me to overturn any laws.
You would have the ability to.
In some contexts, perhaps, but again, this is something that would have to be used very judiciously.
How could you possibly think that this would not undermine the trust in our democracy then?
I think Canadians expect us to act reasonably. I think Canadians expect us to be judicious in our decision making. Passing a law like C-15, which all members will have the opportunity to vote on, is something that is inherently accountable in and of itself.
Well, it has this particular clause that is very problematic. It is all over the news. I have a letter with 43 organizations asking for you to strike it because of the potential of abuse, but you still want to keep it.
I think I've answered that question about 3 times now.
I just don't find it reasonable for you to have the powers of a king, essentially.
Certainly don't have the powers of a king.
If you are allowed to exempt any entity from any federal law, it is like the powers of a king.
Is that a statement or a question?
Well, it's a fact.
Thank you, Ms. Covina. That concludes the time for this round. We will continue with Mr. Fragiscatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials, for being here. Mr. Miller, I want to begin. We heard some comments about the public broadcaster. If you check them to their logical conclusion, it could be argued that colleagues are arguing ultimately for a system where the government is deciding what's broadcast and what is not by the public broadcaster. Can you just reiterate the importance of an independent public broadcaster for a democracy like Canada?
Yeah, look, if it's critical. The broadcasting, the CBC empowering legislative document goes back 90 years. It has been integral to building up and bolstering the democracy that we have today. The CBC, Radio-Canada, has been criticized from its inception. There's books by Pierre Burton on this. It's not an institution that should lack scrutiny, but it certainly needs independence. And when I say independence, it doesn't mean that they are unaccountable. Ultimately, CBC is accountable to the legislation that creates it, but also to the public. Otherwise, the public loses trust. And we've seen the loss of trust in the last few years for a variety of reasons. The prevalent media environment with online platforms, a lot of misinformation, disinformation spreading around. And as a beacon of light in that, sometimes vomitorium, you need an independent broadcaster that has the resources, often supported by the state, without the influence of the state. So independence of the CEO, of the board, of the editorial boards in the context of our bilingual country, access to content in English and French. And those are, and it should never be understated, a key pillar in keeping me and you accountable, but also, members of the opposition. And so key to that is making sure that information is honest, truthful, with a process that ensures that independence, where journalists can ask me the same difficult questions that they ask the opposition.
Thank you very much. I also want to ask you a question about something different now, multiculturalism in Canada and its future. You're the minister responsible for introducing a really important set of reforms that have helped to begun to restore sustainability in the immigration system, but still we do see a narrative on immigration in Canada and other democracies, of course. What future do you see for multiculturalism in this country? How will you be moving forward in terms of continuing to underline the importance of that kind of vision for a multicultural, multi-faith democracy as is Canada, considering the prevalence of current narratives around it?
Hopefully I won't be alone in it, but as the minister in charge of the multiculturalism law, to make sure that the principles that underpin it are being maintained in the context of the country that we are, bilingual for a country that's been built on immigration other than Indigenous peoples. It's no secret to anyone that there is large anti-immigrant sentiment. When we see that eating away at the public narrative in a toxic way, it eats away at another fundamental pillar of our democracy, which is pluralism, that multiculturalism underpins. People do need to integrate to Canada in a democracy and subscribe and practice our values, one of them being our respect of the Charter of Rights and Freedom. And key to this is making sure that we continue the investments in highlighting not only who we are as a country, first and foremost Canadians, but at times united by our differences. And that sometimes requires funds that we come here and humbly ask for. But it also requires engagement from all Canadians and not just elected officials to realize that we are better because we have the ability to have discussions about our differences, but realize at the end of the day that we're all Canadians and proud of it.
Thank you very much. I have 40 seconds left. The people back home in London wouldn't be happy if I didn't ask a question on the following. The film sector and its future. There's a lot of excitement around the city. We've had a few films shot in London, a few TV shows. What would you advise medium-sized communities like London in terms of what they can do to better position themselves in terms of that kind of vision for the future? It's been an emerging area in our economy in some ways.
Very brief response, please.
Well, get out and go to London. It's a lovely place. I've been there myself, but you see a lot of films being filmed around the country, and we need to keep that up. That reality is under threat in some very asymmetrical discussions with our partner to the south of us, but we need to stay on top of it.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Fragiscados. Et on va conclure cette heure avec Monsieur Garon.
And we will conclude this hour with 2.5 minutes to Mr. Garon. Thank you, Chair. Minister, you seemed very interested in the role of the state in TV broadcasting. I'd like to know your take. Is it the state's role to broadcast ads on public TV? For example, deodorant ads, potato chip ads during the election period. Is that the role of the state, in your opinion? It seems like you know a bit about this. Well, the role of the state is to fund a public broadcaster. And then if that broadcaster afterwards generates ad revenue for itself, well, it's interesting what you say. You're saying that it's secondary, the fact that there are billions of dollars that already go to CBC, that you add 150 million on top of that. Ms. Saint-Onge was your predecessor. I don't think that she thought that this was secondary. On this file, I believe that she thought that it was important to regulate that policy at CBC. You think that that's secondary? No, but I think that the state doesn't have that kind of direct influence to tell CBC what to do and not to do. So you give them the funding. You could say nobody likes ads, put fewer ads. We're giving you 150 million extra. I think that if CBC includes ads in its programming, I don't think it's serious. Well, if it's not that serious, this is taxpayer money. Why didn't you say we're going to give you 150 million in funding and you're going to stop playing ads? Nobody likes ads anyway. I think that that would have been possible. I don't think that nobody likes ads. Some of them I don't like, but well, we can have a referendum on that topic. Well, the Bloc loves its referendums. And we're going to end on that note. Thank you very much, Mr. Garon. And on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the minister and the public servants who are here accompanying him. We will now take a brief break in order to prepare for the next hour of our committee meeting. Thank you.
are going to get started. We will resume the meeting. I would like to welcome our witnesses. We have Vicky Eatridges, the chairperson and CEO at the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. She is joined by Scott Hutton, the Vice President, Consumer Analytics and Strategy, Scott Shortliff, Vice President, Broadcasting, and Rachel Frenette, the General Counsel and Executive Director, Legal Services. So with that, Ms. Eatridges, you have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm joined today by colleagues who have already been introduced. We have Scott and Scott to make things easier, and our senior legal counsel, Rachel Frenette. We are very pleased to be here as the committee studies Bill C-15. And before we get into committee members' questions, perhaps we could start with a brief overview of the CRTC and the work that we are doing for Canadians. Comme vous le savez, le CRTC est un tribunal.
As you know, the CRTC is an independent quasi-judicial tribunal that regulates the Canadian communications sector in the public interest. We hold public consultations on telecommunications and broadcasting matters, and we make decisions based on the public record. The Commission consists of 9 members, and we are supported by a team of expert staff that help us to make informed decisions.
15, which makes an amendment to the Broadcasting Act. But let me begin by briefly touching on our other major line of work, which is telecommunications. In meetings with Canadians across the country, we hear about how critical high-quality internet and cell phone services are for employment, for healthcare, education, connecting with loved ones, and so much more. We also hear about what happens when there is a lack of meaningful connectivity, and those stories are troubling. In 2019, the CRTC launched a broadband fund as part of a government-wide effort to help connect rural, remote, and Indigenous communities across Canada. Since then, we have allocated funding to projects delivering internet and cell phone services to over 54,000 homes in over 320 communities. These projects are connecting critical institutions like schools, healthcare facilities, and community centers that people rely on every single day. The CRTC's work to improve connectivity goes hand in hand with our efforts to strengthen competition and to make telecom services more affordable. One way we are helping to provide Canadians with more choice is by allowing competitors to sell plans using the networks of the large telecommunications companies. For internet services, more than a dozen companies are using the access granted by our framework to provide competitive plans to Canadians. And for cell phone services, competitors have expanded into 88 communities across 7 provinces. So what does that mean? It means that there's more choice for Canadians when they are looking for internet and cell phone plans. And we are also seeing some positive movement on prices. For example, according to StatsCan, prices for cell phone services decreased by over 37% over the past 4 years. At the same time, we know that networks are expensive to build and to maintain. So we've put measures in place to make sure that companies keep investing. So making sure that Canadians have access to high-quality networks and to choice is one part of the equation. The other part is making sure that we can easily find those choices and switch to plans that meet their needs. Last year, we launched a Consumer Protection Action Plan to help protect and empower Canadians. And to bring that plan to life, we initiated public proceedings dealing with everything from preventing bill shock to limiting fees to making it easier to compare offers and to switch plans. We will issue those decisions in the weeks and months to come, so stay tuned. Voilà donc un aperçu de notre travail du quotidien.
So that is some of the work that we do in telecommunications. Now I will share a bit about what we're doing in broadcasting. As you know, through the Online Streaming Act, Parliament entrusted us with the mandate to modernize Canada's broadcasting framework and ensure that online streaming services make meaningful contributions to Canadian and Indigenous content. Overhauling the decades-old regulatory framework is no small task. The changes that are required are substantial and complex. One of our first key decisions under the new legislation required online streaming service to direct funding to areas of immediate need, such as local news on radio and television, French language, and Indigenous content. This will result in is to support the Canadian broadcasting system, and we will be issuing other major decisions in the coming months.
Yet, but we're helping make real meaningful progress. More Canadians now have access to high-speed internet. There are more choices when it comes to cell phone services. Stronger consumer protections are coming, and the broadcasting system is evolving to better reflect Canada of today and tomorrow. Merci encore.
Thank you, Ms. Atreides. We will begin now with 6 minutes from Ms. Thomas, please.
Thank you. Ms. Atreides, I'm just curious with regards to Bill C-11. It's been on your plate for just about 2 years now. I'm curious as to how much has been spent on preparing for the implementation of Bill C-11.
So let me share very briefly what we've been doing on Bill C-11.
It's okay. I'm not asking for an outline of things that have been done. I'm just asking for the monetary amount that has been spent.
Okay, I'm not sure that we have those numbers at our fingertips, but I'm just turning to our head of broadcasting. We would be able to get that figure to you.
Okay, and that figure can be sent over to the committee then?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you very much. With regards to Bill C-11 and Bill C-18, I'm curious as to, since their passing, what type of analysis has been done in terms of their impact on subscription prices, reduced service options, content being blocked or downgraded. What type of analysis has the CRTC done in terms of the impact of Bill C-11 and C-18 on these things?
So Bill C-11 gave us a mandate to modernize the Act, and so we've been taking a number of steps to do that. We have put in place base contributions, bringing in the online streamers, which was what we were asked to do by Parliament. We have also put in place a new definition for Canadian content, and we're taking measures to support.
I'm just going to take you back to my question. In your opening statement, you used the word choice multiple times, being on the side of the consumer multiple times. If that truly is the desire of the CRTC, then I would imagine that some analysis has been done with regards to Bill C-18 and C-11 and making things more affordable. Has that taken place?
So again, in terms of the mandate under the Online Streaming Act and putting that in place, what we've been asked to do is bring in the online streamers as broadcasters, which is what we've been working on, and that's why we have our initial base contributions decision. And the work continues in terms of putting these measures in place.
So do you expect that consumer prices would go up or down based on Bill C-11?
Again, I would come back to our mandate, and our mandate is to ensure that the online streamers are brought into the system, and the other objectives of the Act, which are to support Canadian and Indigenous content, and that's what we've been focused on.
Okay, so absolutely no care of the consumer whatsoever in the considerations and deliberations that take place at the CRTC.
So again, what we've been doing is holding public proceedings, which includes hearing from various consumer groups, and you know, I can tell you that in the context of the Canadian content hearing, we heard from 500 interveners. We heard live from almost 80. So we've heard a wide range of perspectives on this, and what we're putting in place is what Parliament has asked us to do.
What's the number one benefit that you're hearing from consumers?
To ensure that we are supporting areas that are important, like local news, like French content, Indigenous content. So that's what we're hearing in terms of what Canadians are asking for.
And what would the number one drawback be? What are they concerned about with the implementation of Bill C-11? You said you've heard from over 500 consumer groups. What's their top concern?
Well, again, it comes back to the issues that we've been talking about. People are very focused on wanting to make sure that we have support for things like news. We've heard a lot about the importance. People are concerned, as I think we all hear about from Canadians, about loss of news and that kind of content.
So I hear from quite a few people in my office as well. I wouldn't know the exact number, but it would be well over 100. And the top two concerns that I hear, oh, yeah, it would be in the thousands, actually, if I do that math correctly. And the top concerns that I hear about are the protection of freedom, choice, speech, access to information. And the second thing that I hear a lot about is just consumer pricing. They're concerned that with increased regulation, consumer pricing will go up. I'm surprised that neither of these were mentioned by you, and so I'm curious as to why we're hearing conflicting things.
So I would say that freedom of expression and the free flow of information is a fundamental principle on both the telecommunications work that we do and on the broadcasting side as well. In terms of pricing on the broadcasting side, that's for private companies. We don't regulate the price of broadcasting.
No, but your regulation does cause prices to go up.
We are focused on putting in place the measures that Parliament has asked us to. And
But just a moment ago, you also said that you're focused on making things more affordable for Canadians and being on the side of the consumer.
That's correct, and there are a lot of examples of the work that we've been doing to ensure more affordability, which is having more choice.
And so I'm just curious how Bill C-11 falls into that example of creating greater affordability.
Well, when I was talking about creating better affordability, that was in the context of our telecommunications work in terms of internet pricing and cell phone pricing.
Okay, so it's probably more reasonable to expect that Bill C-11 will actually cause the prices to go up.
I can't speak to what private companies do. We don't regulate.
But there will be a greater regulatory burden that they will have to carry, correct?
They do have to comply with regulations.
Okay. And will they be expected to change their algorithm?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. That concludes the time for this round. We will continue with Mr. Sawatsky for 6 minutes, please.
Hello, thank you for coming today. I just wanted to bring our topic over to the scam calls, unsolicited calls. I'm sure we all get them. I certainly get quite a few, not only calls but also texts. At a previous meeting, we had RCMP Chief Superintendent Michael Segbini here, and I had asked about this question as well, and he said that the RCMP has worked with telcos to try to minimize this. So just, I guess, for context here, I mean, these calls are not only a problem, but they pose consumer protection risks for seniors, vulnerable populations who might be targeted through phishing and fraud schemes. If you could speak on what enforcement actions the CRTC is currently undertaking to investigate and prevent such calls or texts, including spoofs and abandoned robocalls, and maybe just a note to how effective those measures have been in reducing scam calls for Canadians.
So perhaps I can start off, and I might turn things over to my colleague Scott to provide more detail. Certainly, we hear a lot about scam calls, and they are absolutely a nuisance at best, and sometimes fraudulent at worst. There is a government-wide effort to tackle these issues. So we do work with the Privacy Commissioner and the Competition Bureau to promote compliance with CASL, so Canada's anti-spam law. So we do that. So we do work within a civil regime. We have a small but mighty team that works on that. So the main thing that we do on that front is to promote compliance. But again, working with law enforcement who has a criminal aspect as well. I don't know if you want to add some details.
Yeah, what we've also found very much that helps in the work, as Vicky mentioned, as our chair mentioned, very much we're in a civil regime, and we end up collaborating with civil partners that we've mentioned, but also with those who do look at cybercrime and who are, with respect to actual fraud on that front. And really much in light of our role, certainly we're able to share and participate and gain knowledge and share our knowledge with those parties. But very much it's working collaboratively to provide prevention, to advising Canadians what are the most recent scams, things that we're hearing through the Spam Reporting Centre, things that we hear from actual complaints filed with us and those that we are investigating. We can't quite share the investigations in light of, the very nature of them being investigations with you, but certainly we are continuing on that front. But what is very, very helpful is helping and arming Canadians with the information needed for them to make sure they can protect themselves.
Thank you very much. Switching the topic over to local media, Of course, there's been a profound transformation over the past decade. Traditional revenue models that once funded Canadian programming, like cable and television subscriptions, are declining, and then, of course, other streaming platforms have grown. So the CRTC's new digital broadcasting regulatory framework, it requires online streaming services to financially contribute to the creation, production, and promotion of Canadian content. So can the CRTC, if you could provide an estimate of the projected annual financial contributions that online streaming platforms will now be required to make under the new regulatory framework, and how much reinvestment this is expected to generate for Canada's cultural production ecosystem?
So as part of the Online Streaming Act that was given to us by Parliament, we were directed to bring online streamers into the regime. We fairly quickly held a proceeding and a public hearing on base contributions. So to start to get that money flowing fairly quickly, we certainly heard about a need, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of local news and the importance of news and some of the challenges that are being faced. So we did issue a decision on base contributions that is expected to bring in an estimated $200 million per year. So that is the base contributions. And the work continues in terms of the actual expenditures for each of the companies. So we're continuing to work on that.
Thank you. Chair, sorry, how long do I have left?
1.5 minutes.
1.5 minutes. Okay, so I was reading about the Next Generation 911, which would represent a critical modernization of Canada's emergency communications infrastructure. Unlike legacy 911 systems, NG911 enables Canadians to access emergency services through voice, text, real-time video, and data transmission, which improves response capabilities, especially for persons with disabilities in crisis situations. Implementing NG911 requires substantial investment into telecom network upgrades, cybersecurity protections, data management systems, and public safety answering point modernization. Given the scale of these infrastructure and operational costs, it would be great if you could explain how CRTC is overseeing the national rollout of Next Gen 911, what's the total estimated cost of the implementation, and what safeguards are in place to ensure that the public safety upgrades don't disproportionately increase costs for consumers.
So perhaps I can start, and I don't know if we'll have time to go for any detail, perhaps not. But what I would say there is, I mean, obviously, I think we all know how important and critical 911 is to Canadian safety. This is an issue that we've been looking at for some time and have been consulting on very broadly. We have been hearing from...
Apologies, I'm going to have to end it there. Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. On va continuer avec
We'll
Monsieur
continue now with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back closer to the bill that we are looking into, C-15. I know that you can't always tell. That's what we're talking about. And if I am understanding, this bill wants to correct a cancellation or a deletion that was made, rather. I know that it is technical, but could you please explain, in concrete terms, what was the mistake exactly that was committed when it comes to protections for privacy, perhaps with concrete examples? And was the privacy of Canadian citizens jeopardized with that error? Because that is what we are dealing with today. Perhaps to begin, I could say that privacy is our utmost priority. So with every decision that we do take, we take into consideration Canadians' privacy. That is always the case. And I know that there was a mistake that was committed, but I can assure you that we have always taken privacy into consideration. Perhaps just to provide explanation, I can ask Rachel, our lawyer, to answer. So, Madam Chair, to explain a bit of context around the provision that this committee is currently studying, based on our understanding, this is a legislative provision that is interpretative by nature. In the work that we carry out, the Commission must examine privacy issues in the subjects that it looks into. There were some changes and adoptions made in Parliament of legislative measures, and inadvertently, this interpretative text was deleted. What I can tell you about our work is that the Commission has always taken into consideration privacy issues. For example, when we start public hearings, we are also subject to the Privacy Act like all other federal institutions, which means that we must respect all of the provisions under that act. There are also other statutory measures, including under the Broadcasting Act, that have an impact on Canadians' privacy. So we have undertaken our work in full consciousness of the privacy issues in the regulatory work that we do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's clear enough. So what I'm understanding is this. There was a change, a legislative change that was made that is here to put a Band-Aid over the boo-boo, and it was and now I would like to come back to the minister's testimony from earlier. We were talking about the role of the state in TV broadcasting, and he answered me that it was the state's role to fund CBC because only I'm not an expert in broadcasting, and I was under the impression that the CRTC regulates traditional television for all channels. The minister might have made a mistake when he spoke. Thank you for the question. I wasn't here for the minister's testimony, so I can't comment on his remarks, but we are responsible for the whole system. So that includes traditional radio and TV. It also includes online services now. And in the Broadcasting Act, it is clear that this is all one system, and we are responsible for regulating all of it. Thank you very much. I just have a minute and a half left, so I'll ask you shorter questions. Often when we look at the CRTC's work, when people from the industry look at what you do, for example, they get the impression that it takes you a very long time to render your decisions. Could something be done to speed up CRTC decision-making on the regulatory process? So just to start answering, unfortunately, that is not the first time we have been asked that question. So I think as a quasi-judiciary tribunal, naturally, we do have to adhere to processes. We have, for example, public hearings, and we need to hear from all stakeholders who are interested parties. So in and of itself, that takes time. I can speak to some things that could be done, but I know we don't have much time. Yes, I might leave you the remaining time, but is are funding resources an issue? Do you have enough funding? What are the main reasons why it takes so long to reach a decision? Well, we know that industry players often have to wait for long times. We know that this is the nature of our work. It's because we have such formal processes. That sort of thing takes time, like the public hearings. As I mentioned, we had 500 interveners for one case alone on the definition of Canadian content. It's very time-consuming. We've also held a public hearing that lasted for 3 weeks, and there are many different points of view to be taken into consideration. Thank you, Mr. Garron.
5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, witnesses, for being here, officials. So I'd like to go back to the Online Streaming Act and specifically the new definition of Canadian content that the CRTC has set out. What is the mechanism by which streaming companies that fall under the Act, whether it's YouTube or Netflix or a podcast platform, is expected to conform to its obligations?
So what we are working toward through these various proceedings, and there's some more to come. We have other public proceedings that are ongoing. Through those decisions, we will be moving to conditions of service, and those will apply to specific companies.
But in effect, they would have to make sure that their algorithms conform to serve up the required amount of content that you've said is fitting that new definition, correct?
So the Act actually prohibits us from regulating algorithms, so we don't do that.
How are they supposed to ensure that they're offering up the right balance of CRTC-approved content without an algorithm change?
Perhaps I'll turn this over to our head of broadcasting to provide more detail.
Yeah, we have certain decisions that are still before us, but what I can say is we ask questions about discoverability. Discoverability is more than algorithms. We had several of the streamers intervene in those proceedings and bring to our attention the amounts they already spend on promoting Canadian content, what they do in terms of billboards, promotions, what they do in terms of bringing Canadian artists forward. By their own testimony, they've said there are many ways they can make content discoverable. We are now examining whether we will build rules around those. Those decisions are still forthcoming. But I will say the concept of discoverability is not the same as algorithms because, as the chair said, the Act clearly says we will not make orders regulating the use of specific computer algorithms or source code.
So you mentioned advertising. So you're saying that YouTube could satisfy its obligations by running a billboard campaign promoting heated rivalry, but not changing anything about the YouTube homepage or the user suggestions? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that we ask questions about what are the best ways to promote Canadian content and make them discoverable because it was an objective in the Act.
But you've had several years. You've had several years of this already. So I feel like you're saying that you don't prescribe an algorithm, knowing full well that in order to conform to the regulations, these streaming companies will have to modify their algorithms. Can you give me an example of how they would meet your definition or your expectation without having to amend their algorithms?
If I could just take this in two parts. First of all, our definition is definitions of Canadian content that is applied throughout the system. It's not necessarily about promoting specific shows. In terms of how they could meet that, that is a subject of a public consultation and a forthcoming decision. And because we're a quasi-judicial tribunal, I can't give you examples at this time.
Okay. So we're just supposed to just trust that it'll all work out? Is that the expectation on Canadians?
I think that the CRTC always expects that Canadians will hold us to account when our decisions come out, and we will be pleased to answer questions when our decisions come out.
Consumers desire a variety of things. There are Canadians, people that live in Canada that represent diverse backgrounds that may prefer to watch content from their home country or in a different language. In the past, CRTC has actively fought certain aspects of consumer preference. A notable example of this is, the SIM subbing debate from some years ago, where Canadians wanted to be able to access American Super Bowl ads, and the CRTC erred against consumer choice. So what safeguards are in place to ensure that this isn't going to happen with online streaming regulations?
Well, what I could say is we will act within the ambit of the law that Parliament has given us. SimSub is a very complicated discussion, but I will say that the CRTC actually brought in a rule saying that Canadians could watch the Super Bowl on whatever platform they wished. However, we were taken to court. The Supreme Court of Canada found that we had exceeded our powers in that respect.
So what's the recourse available if a platform is not complying with the framework that's set out? I won't name any, but let's say that there's a company that doesn't believe this has all that much authority, but they meet what you believe is the threshold for it. What can CRTC do to force compliance or disconnect service in Canada?
I think, sorry, I'm just trying to parse your question and make sure that I answer it correctly. Forgive me if I'm
If someone doesn't comply, what do you have available?
If someone doesn't comply, we have an escalating series of measures we can take that start with a warning letter that can go to a mandatory hearing. At the most extreme level, Parliament has now given us the possibility of administrative monetary penalties, which is a tool we have not used to date. So we have a variety of tools. I think the
could you shut off access to a website in Canada?
We have no power to shut off access to the internet, no.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. That concludes your time. We'll continue with Mr. Fragiscatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of you for being here. Ms. Atreides, question on artificial intelligence, in fact. I know you gave a recent interview in early January on how the CRTC was approaching or beginning to approach that question. I ask the question as a parliamentarian, and I think all of us around the table and beyond are concerned about the rise of AI. We see tremendous potential with it, of course, for democracy perhaps, but also for all sorts of benefits beyond democracy, in healthcare in particular, I think. But let's think about generative AI, for example, and what that might mean ultimately for deep fakes, the use of those in election campaigns or between election campaigns, these kinds of things. I know that the European Union is advanced, certainly, when it comes to looking at questions like that. Is the CRTC prepared to delve in further and address the matter?
So I can tell you what we hear about and have been hearing about in our proceedings with respect to AI. Obviously, there's a lot of concern. There's a broad range of views, which is not surprising in the broadcasting sector. We hear a fear that television and movies will no longer be created by humans. There's obviously fear about job loss, which you hear across the board. We've also heard some positive remarks about accessibility and how closed captioning and other accessible tools have been made better because of AI. So we've heard a wide range. We have been asking questions about AI in our most recent decision on the definition of Canadian content. We did include in our decision a reference to, creators should be human and not artificial intelligence. So we have been starting to address those kinds of issues on the broadcasting side.
And that's encouraging, but obviously these risks remain. And again, I look to Europe, where, for example, they've moved ahead and required that the individual or the organization that originates the AI content, the video, in this case, the example that I'm giving, that be made clear. So when it comes to deep fakes, for example, I've mentioned that already. That's where I think the real risk is. If there's risks, all of us do worry about that, and constituents do too. Do you believe that the content creators of AI should be, we should know who's putting out such videos? Should that be required, as Europe has moved in the direction of?
If I may, because we also have questions about AI usage in others of our consultations, which are still open. What I could say is that we're in close touch with our colleagues in Europe. We trade information with them. We're aware we're under different legal statutes. We're building a record around broadcasting in Canada. We're also not responsible for the open internet, and we realize that deep fakes are often shared on social media platforms, which we don't regulate. On broadcasting platforms, we have asked questions around the usage of AI, and we have raised the question about labeling. It is a matter that is still before us, but we're certainly paying close attention to what's happening in Europe while balancing that with our primordial mission to ensure that there's freedom of expression. So we're always balancing those issues.
And I know, and all of us know, that it's a new and emerging area, and so of course I would encourage you to continue to make efforts on that, and it's very good that you're engaged with the Europeans on it. I have about a minute left. Could you touch again on the advances that have been made when it comes to affordability? I'm thinking specifically here about cell phones. This has been an ongoing issue for a number of years. Can you go over the numbers again, Mr. Tridius, on the achievements that we've seen so far?
Well, like committee members, I'm sure we often hear when we are speaking with Canadians across Canada about the challenges in terms of affordability. The measures that we've put in place on, you asked about cell phone services on the cell phone side, where we have allowed competitors to offer more choice to compete using the networks of large telecommunications companies. We've seen a lot of choice come out of that. The StatsCan data that we've seen that I referred to earlier is that from 2021 to 2025, cell phone prices have gone down more than 37%, which is quite significant considering we've seen a lot of other prices relatively stable in the market or going up. So we have seen some positive signs on that front.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscados. On va continuer avec Monsieur Champoux.
We'll continue with Mr. Champoux for 2 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you for welcoming me to your committee. a first time for me, but it's not the first time that I've spoken with our representatives from the CRTC, and it's a pleasure to see you again. Mr. Garon is sharing his time with me, and I would like to ask you about independent local news. The CRTC has handed down a decision that made me afraid to join the broadcasters eligible for this group. The CRTC justified Chorus being part of this group, saying that new funding was going to arrive to enrich the program. And the CRTC said that Chorus was a major player, and the funding still has not been seen. So can we have an update? What can we tell to the broadcasters who are having such a hard time keeping their newsrooms open? I can start very briefly to give some context. So, regarding news, we have heard Canadians, and we could not agree more. The news is very important. We have taken multiple measures to support news, including our decision on the base contributions. News is very important and deserves our funding. We took one decision for radio, one decision for television broadcasting, and on that I will ask Scott. I have very little time. Scott, I know you can give us really detailed answers, but what I really want to know is the funding on its way? Can the CRTC reassure broadcasters that they will receive that support? That's really the question on all of their lips. There was a decision at the Federal Court of Appeal. When there will be a decision, rather, from the Federal Court of Appeals, the funding will be ready to go. I check 3 times per day on the court's website. That is where the blockage is happening now. At the same time, we are in contact with the Canadian Broadcasters Association to continue having information regarding pressures on broadcasters. I'm sorry, Mr. Shortlive. Thank you, Mr. Champoux.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Commissioner and officials. In September, you appeared at the Industry Committee to answer questions, including questions from my colleague, Raquel Dancho, the member for Kildonan St. Paul. She asked you a series of questions about what the CRTC is doing to crack down on fraud and scam phone calls. You then talked about resources and talked about limitations, but you said that you have a role to play, and I wonder if you can update Canadians on what your office is doing to cut down on the problem ongoing of fraud conducted over the telephone.
So thank you for the question. I mean, this, as we talked about earlier, this is obviously at best an annoyance and at worst fraudulent and criminal. We do have a civil regime that we, together with the Bureau and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, we promote compliance with, and there's a lot of education on that front. Anything that falls more within the sort of pure fraud type of activity, that would fall more with law enforcement.
As the regulator, you have a role, though, regulating the companies that carry the phone lines over which this fraud is done, and the amount is not trivial. The estimates are up to $12 billion. All MPs are contacted in their communities by victims of fraud. They tend to be among the more vulnerable in our society, up to the estimate being as high as $12 billion. I think Canadians are looking for urgency on this, not just explanations of all the different jurisdictions. So what is your, can you demonstrate to Canadians the urgency and tell us what, since that meeting in September, what further steps your commission has taken on this?
So we are always promoting compliance and education about scam calls. I would say, and you did mention this, but it is a very small part of our role. The only amounts that we get in terms of parliamentary appropriations from government are it's less than 5% of.
Okay, so are you under-resourced to fulfill this aspect of your mandate?
We work with others to fulfill this part of our mandate, and so we work with partners on this front. So again, what our focus has been is really to help promote compliance, and again, working with our partners on this front to do
Okay,
that.
are legislative changes needed to give you tools that you need to properly regulate the businesses that through which these frauds are conducted?
So again, we're part of the civil regime that we help promote compliance with CASL, with Canada's anti-spam law. The type of fraud, if you're talking about pure fraud, which more falls on the criminal side, that would be all law enforcement. So even additional resources would not put us in the realm of
Okay, but the companies you regulate are on the front line of this, and this is where referral to law enforcement would come into to play, correct? You would refer to law enforcement.
And we do.
Okay, but the vast majority of cases are not even reported. Most victims just don't even report, and prosecutions are I think rare. Do you know if there's a success rate on prosecutions for the referrals that you make?
Again, I think that this would be a better question for law enforcement because our regime is civil. We do
Yeah, but
not.
I'm asking how much about the referrals that you make to. You said that you're in partnership with law enforcement. So, how many referrals have you made for prosecution in the last, I don't know, any year you might be able to track?
So it's complaint based. We should be able to get the information in terms of how many complaints we would pass along to law enforcement.
Okay, please table that.
Okay.
And do you know if there is a success? Are you able to give sufficient evidence for law enforcement and then prosecutions to make the case?
Yeah, the regime we have, and through the Spam Reporting Center, through our arrangements we share complaints received. We are not involved in the prosecution, so we would not have data in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We'll continue with Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes now.
Thank you, witnesses. Can you, we've been talking about fraud, so I'm going to just branch out a little from that. On the CRTC's role in controlling sextortion of our youth in Canada, do you have a role to play? And can you speak to that?
My short answer would be no. I don't know if our legal counsel has anything to add on that.
Madam President, I mean, we are a statutory creature. We are bound by the statute, and we implement the statutes that Parliament, in its wisdom, has chosen to provide us the mandate with. And certainly, while that is an extraordinarily pressing issue for all Canadians, it is not within the realm of the CRTC to regulate in that space.
So you would have to you'd have to take direction from statutes to put regulations in place that would make online platforms accountable, because what happens is the bad actors that are from outside of our country, we can't punish them by regular law. We would have to have regulations that would make the platform providers accountable.
It would appear, I mean, when we're talking about issues like sextortion, I mean, those are criminal matters, which would probably be more appropriately dealt with by law enforcement agencies. As the communications regulator, one would think that we have to be bound by the statute for which we have been entrusted by Parliament, and that is, regulating the communication space, ensuring a sustainable Canadian broadcasting system, ensuring, a robust telecommunications system across Canada.
Is it reasonable to think that you could, if you were given the direction, regulate online platform providers so that they would have to deal with the issue of sextortion online?
I'd say we'd be very cautious about speculating about anything we haven't received. I'll also note with what Parliament's given us to date, we have a very limited role with online services. We deal with online broadcasters when they act as broadcasters, but for example, the Act is very clear that we don't deal with social media, we don't deal with the open internet, so we have a very restricted role under our legislation currently.
Okay, I'll pivot to something a little more upbeat. In Budget 2025, Canada has included funding for the Canada Music Fund, the Canada Periodic Fund, and Building Communities Through Arts and Heritage Program. And I think that's just sending out a signal to strengthen Canadian storytelling and creative industries. I'm from Atlantic Canada. We depend tremendously on regional broadcasters and small digital platforms to promote culture in our communities. Can you speak to how the CRTC will be encouraging the creation and distribution of culture through their programs?
What I would say is we've been given the mandate by Parliament to put in place and implement the Online Streaming Act, and that is all about ensuring that there is support for Canadian stories, for Canadian content, Indigenous content, and so that is all of the work that we are doing right now and have been working on, is to ensure that those Canadian stories and that Canadian content is available.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. We will now continue with 5 minutes from Mr. Lawton, please.
Thank you very much. So I want to go back to the Online Streaming Act and what's captured by this, because when we are looking at a streaming platform's offerings that would be subject to this, podcasts would be included in that, correct?
So the policy direction that was given to us by government specifically said that podcasts are not included, and as part of our decision on base contributions, we said that we would not regulate podcasts.
How do you define podcasts? Because there are a lot of shows, again, this would be less germane when you're talking about a Netflix, but when you're looking at YouTube, there are a lot of shows that still have production values, production companies, they are visual entities. How are they excluded, and how is that line drawn in a way that a scripted fictional show is captured, but a commentary show or chat show that isn't news programming wouldn't be?
I want to thank you for the question. Those are excellent questions. We haven't gotten to the part of a regulatory cadre where we've had to define exactly what a podcast is. As we move into that social media space, I think the questions you posed are exactly the questions we want to pose and we want to hear from informed witnesses on. So thank you. Those are great questions.
I was bound to have one or two, but I appreciate that. But again, so you're not actually able to definitively say that certain programs that people would largely see as podcasts won't be captured by this because the lines have not yet been drawn, you're saying?
I think what we can say is we've been clear that we won't regulate podcasts. Therefore, if someone brought us a case that said this is an edge case, our starting position would be if it's identified as a podcast, we would not want to regulate it. We would look at evidence put in front of us, but we've been very clear that we have no intention of regulating podcasts, both based on the policy direction and on our decision.
Now, as I read the determinations of what Canadian content is, it's supposed to be, for the most part, value neutral. You're looking predominantly at ownership and production, not whether it sufficiently tells the story of Canada. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, it's based on a point system. It modified a point system which has been around for several decades. We did add some bonus points for identifiable Canadian content, and we went through what that means or whether it's based on Canadian book. But it is meant to be neutrally applied. We don't want to get into a case where I or my colleagues are saying this is Canadian enough. We want to be able to add up points based on who are the Canadians who are making the content.
So that brings us back to the objective. Is the point of this to ensure that we are creating Canadian jobs and supporting productions that create Canadian jobs, or is it about telling the story of Canada? Because in the messaging from the political side of this, from the government, it was always about ensuring Canadian stories are being told. But, you've designed the regulations in a way that is strictly about ownership, and you could have a Canadian-owned production that's set in New York City with American characters that's trying to get picked up by a U.S. network. It's not actually promoting Canadian identity in any meaningful way.
Well, what I'd say is that our existing rules had always been based on that. We've actually tried to come up with a system now that will encourage more partnerships, and we do now have these bonus points that would recognize certain Canadian attributes. I think that we don't see it as an either or. We believe that if you have great Canadian talent, that will bring more economic opportunity into Canada, and it will allow you to reflect Canadian values and Canadian stories.
So, with what you said in mind about the work in progress on defining what a podcast is, how can we ensure that we're keeping the broadest possible, interpretation of that possible, so that we aren't including, what most people would say are shows that should not be subject to this regime in the same way that, a multi-million-dollar scripted production would be?
Well, what I'd say is because we're still building our regulatory cadre, and as I mentioned, we haven't looked specifically at that question, but anything we do will be based on the public record and on public submissions. In answer to an earlier question we have, that's why sometimes it feels like it takes us a long time, but it's because we need those records before we make decisions so that they will be considered and that Canadians will know that we are basing it on evidence put in front of us.
This legislation now goes back many, many years, and obviously you don't want to rush into the wrong decision here, but why has there not been an accounting for what are pretty core questions that were dealt with when the legislation and regulations were being drafted? Why has that not happened yet?
Well, I think we're trying to take the legislation step by step. We took a look at Canadian content audio-visual that we were changing decades worth of practice. We brought in a brace contributions decision that's bringing $200 million into the system. We created a commercial radio news fund. We've bulked up the independent local news fund. We have many more decisions that are coming.
Apologies, Mr. Shortliff. I'm going to have to end it there. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Lawton. I will now turn to Mr. Letow for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day and welcome, and thank you for being here. I would like to discuss two different issues, one on communications and the other on radio broadcasting and television. Personally, I've recently changed to internet service providers, and everything went fine. And I think that I benefited from the fact that there are new rules, which you've put in place, which allow different companies to use those networks. This certainly worked out for me, and I'm very pleased. However, many individuals in our ridings, for example, say that they don't understand. How is it that you're able to force a business that has invested in the creation of a network to allow its competitors to use that infrastructure? Could you perhaps explain that for the benefit of those at home in my riding? And can you also explain how such a decision improves competition and service for citizens? Thank you. Perhaps I can begin, and I'll ask Scott to take over. This is very important. The work that we do is to promote competitiveness, but at the same time, we also want to really encourage investment. We understand that it is tremendously costly to pay for these networks, so we have many measures in place that go along with our decisions to ensure that investment continues. And I will ask Scott to provide further details. Yes, essentially there are two regimes. One of them is at-home internet and one is cell service. They're slightly different, but the concept is the same for both. For us, we put regimes in place, and yes, we ask those businesses to share their networks, but it's for a certain period. It's to let the bigger providers help try to attract clients and to encourage investments in the networks. And the rules that we put in place are there to ensure that the prices are fair and equitable. Companies have to set prices through the Commission, and we work very hard on that. And we have to make sure that they are able to continue to invest, and not just invest, but also come out on top. So some of them use negotiations, some of them negotiate prices with the CRTC, but it's always very important for us to have that balance. We know that we have to balance competition with different players, and we need to make sure that these services are connecting Canadians all across the country. We all know the major players, but there are also medium-sized companies who have also invested in their own networks. And they're coming out disadvantaged following this new regulatory framework. Could you speak to that? So I can talk to you about the cellular network program. Our measures were to encourage those medium-sized businesses. And I say medium-sized, but we really are talking about giants. And this is to help them get out of their traditional region and invest further. And we're seeing that the competitiveness of these players are having an impact on prices in the market. Very quickly, Mr. Shortliff, we don't have much time. You mentioned discoverability, and it's very important. Could you briefly tell us how you are going to ensure that? You unfortunately do not have the time. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Leitao. Mr. Champoux, will you be taking the speaking time? Why should we cut him off when things were going so well? So we're going to conclude this meeting with you for 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. The government has been trying to pass laws on online platforms for 6 years with C11, C18 for the Online News Act. The CRTC was sent these new laws, and it had to comply. And web giants systematically have been fighting against these laws and these regulations. What grade would you give to yourselves, to the CRTC or to Canada, 6 years after Canada began trying to regulate online giants? You can give a grade out of 10 or out of 3 if you want it to look better. Part of my role is to look beyond the CRTC, to look outside at the world. And it's very natural for these stakeholders to be allergic to regulations. And some of our decisions, Scott, I know you well enough to know you won't give a number. I won't give you a number, but I can tell you that we've gone to visit France recently, and there are all kinds of great regulations in place there. But what applies in a different country doesn't necessarily apply here. We do see Canadian success stories and investment here in Canada, so we do have hope. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do have a lot less time than my other colleagues. Something else I notice is that a lot of concessions have been made, so algorithms might have been a problem for secrets that industry players wanted to keep. And blogs were also not covered. So this type of communication, when it comes to consumption of culture Over the past few years, the CRTC is seeing that there's been an evolution in what it needs to regulate. Do you think that... But it would have been such a great answer, Mr. Champoux. I need to cut you off. But perhaps you can submit it to the committee in writing. But this is not the only sitting of the Finance Committee that we'll have today.
For your presentation and assistance here today. Colleagues, I'm going to adjourn this meeting and see all of you back here in 10 minutes to begin the next meeting of the Finance Committee for today. Meeting adjourned.